You're watching Capital City Sunday.
This past week, Governor Tony Evers vetoed a bill that would have eliminated a governor's ability to fill vacancies through appointment for some state offices. One of those is Secretary of State. Republicans passed that bill after Evers appointed Sarah Godlewski to the job when longtime Secretary Doug LaFollette resigned just a few months after winning a new term. Godlewski has held the post for a year now. She sat down with Darielle Fair to talk about her first year in office.
Here with me now is Wisconsin Secretary of State, Sarah Godlewski. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's jump right into it, Secretary. This is your first full year in office. Can you talk a little bit about the accomplishments you're most proud of since you've been appointed to this role?
So it's hard to believe that I was sworn into office in my Packer pajamas at my house on a Friday morning around a year ago. And why don't I first just start with what I walked into. So when I walked into the state office, it was like nothing I would have ever expected. There were literally a backlog of cases that were waiting to be resolved and authenticated. There were piles of records that needed to be organized and digitized. They were using a state seal from 1881 that's older than the state capitol in their day-to-day operations, and staff were using their own supplies just to do day-to-day work. And so for me, what was unbelievable is that this could all be prevented. It's a result of how the legislature literally was so extreme and have cut off this office at the detriment of Wisconsin. And while this was a really tough situation to walk into, I'm proud of how we, just with pure grit, were able to turn things around.
And a part of your role as Secretary of State here in Wisconsin is to strengthen the state's democracy. Your office is not responsible for administering the state's elections, but you have said you plan to use it to improve transparency around them. Can you talk about or just give us a response to what you think in terms of the Wisconsin Elections Commission having some concerns, including the chief official, Megan Wolf, in regards to the commission being the sole primary source of information pertaining to elections, and just having a concern around causing some confusion around them?
So the Wisconsin Election Commission administers elections, and something that we've been really working on under this larger umbrella of democracy is how we're supporting our clerks. So we have a responsibility to be working with our clerks, and I've traveled the state meeting with them, whether it's in Bayfield or in La Crosse or in Stevens Point. But what we've been talking about is how they are at capacity and what we can do to be providing more resources and supporting them. So whether it's my office and our technology and our resources that we want to be helpful with, to look, like I recently heard a story about how a clerk was sharing, this is a county clerk, they had muni clerks that positions were vacant. And how are we going to get people to want to do this work? And so we're also working with the next generation to create career paths and civic engagement and civic education. And so there's a lot of, I think, exciting opportunities when it comes to our democracy, but the clerks are the cornerstones and critical, and they do such important work every day.
And so just around this conversation, broader conversation, right, about ethics in the state's elections, in December, you sent a letter to Senate Majority Leader Devin Lemonhew calling for the removal of Wisconsin Elections Commissioner Bob Spindell for the role he played in falsifying certificates that Donald Trump won the 2020 presidential election. What is your office doing to address Spindell still serving on the commission now that we are headed into another election year?
So one of our roles is to keep a fair and accurate record for the people of Wisconsin. And when the fake electors submitted a document asking me to just disregard the falsified certificate of votes that they submitted, that, just look the other way, I just can't do that. And so at the end of 2023, when we received this information, I not only brought it to the public, but we called on Robert Spindell, who's part of the Election Commission, to resign because he put personal preference above the will of the people, and he admitted it in a document. I actually brought the documents here with me today. So people at home know this is actually what a real certificate looks like. We seal it. That's part of our ability to kind of validate that this is government approved, government information. And then this is literally the fake electors that were, trying to impersonate the government and trying to overturn the will of the people with the 2020 election. And Robert Spindell should not be excused for this behavior because he admitted that what he did was wrong. He knew better. He is responsible as part of the team to administer elections. He knew better, and he needs to resign.
And so the Secretary of State is an elected office. There was a lot of controversy, right, around the fact that Governor Tony Evers appointed you to this position last March. Instead of holding a special election, your predecessor held this office for 50 years. How do you feel you've contributed to this role? And what do you want voters to know that may be concerned that they did not have the chance to play an active part in bringing you into office?
So Governor Evers was overwhelmingly elected, and what the Constitution says is that when a constitutional office vacates, that he has the ability to appoint somebody. And it's an honor of a lifetime, and something my grandma would say to me. She was part of the first group of women in World War II. She would say, public office is a real honor, but it's not easy, but it's worth the fight. And so I'm really proud of how we've been able to really do a lot of good things for the people of Wisconsin. So as I mentioned, we've been able to modernize the office. So we no longer have a backlog of cases. We are dealing with adoptions, for example, or businesses that want to do work overseas. Last year alone, we did 15,000 cases. So we've addressed the backlog. We're now digitizing our records and putting that online. We're working with clerks and figuring out how we can best support them and the work that they do every day. And so this wasn't with any support, again, from the legislature. As I mentioned, they have literally cut off and almost practically defunded this office at the detriment of Wisconsin. We've been able to address the backlog, reduced our wait times in half, just with pure grit. And we're going to continue to do that, whether it's our work to strengthen and defend democracy, to my colleagues across the entire country have been doing work with economic security. And we want to do more when it comes to making sure we buy Wisconsin. It's a critical part of our economy here.
Secretary of State Godlewski, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.